Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing, the Fawn Pod, the Fawncast. It's Cody, and I'm back with my barely hanging in there weekly installment of my 60th anniversary James Bond watch along. I am up to, boy, I don't even know what I'm at this point, 14-ish movies into this. This is an interesting one today as we are checking out Sean Connery's return in one of the two non-Eon productions that we have here for James Bond. This is called Never Say Never Again. And I will say this is one I was super intrigued by because Connery had been gone for a while at this point. If you recall, he stepped away to let George Lazenby take over once on Her Majesty's Secret Service. He has now been gone, and we've had six movies in a row by Roger Moore. And this movie came out the same year as Octopussy, which I reviewed last. And well, we'll talk about score comparisons in a second here. But what's notable about this movie is probably just the behind the scenes drama maybe being more exciting than the movie drama at times. So this is kind of interesting here as I was just checking before I came online some of the details behind this. So this is essentially a remake of a sort of the movie Thunderball, which has already been in our watch along and also had Sean Connery, interestingly. That movie was from an older story that is from Ian Fleming, as I understand this. And that story was based on an earlier story, which was written by Kevin McClory, Jack Whittingham, and Ian Fleming himself. And then we get this dispute, essentially, where it says Ian Fleming was sent some legal recommendations here because apparently the characters in this film and some of the ones used in the James Bond pantheon were actually determined to be owned by Kevin McClory, and that includes the rights to this particular story as well as a couple characters. So that's kind of interesting, but it's also interesting that Connery would go and remake the same movie he's already done. So that's really interesting. But this movie was made originally in, I think, around 65, I want to say, was when Thunderball came out. And yes, 65. And then there was some legal deal that McClory couldn't make another version of this for at least 10 years. And so by the mid 70s, this guy is working on a new adaptation, which originally is called Warhead. Then, after the ruling that McClory owns the rights to Spectre and Blofeld, the character, they had to be taken out of The Spy Who Loved Me, and that was going to get redone without those elements in there. And we've kind of seen Blofeld pop in and out and Spectre pop in and out. I just assumed because mostly some plots called for it, some plots did not call for it. But there we go. And as this sequel, well, I shouldn't even call it a sequel, reimagining of Thunderball came along, the last piece that was changed, it says here, is that we had a new title in this called Never Say Never Again, which was Sean Connery's wife apparently suggested this and has credits in the movie. And this is because, of course, Sean Connery famously said he is never going to play this character again. And so Bond is never saying never again in this one. And there we go. This was attempted to be blocked, I will point out, also this year in England, but the court sided with McClory on this one, and the Eon lawsuit was basically thrown out, and Never Say Never Again was allowed to come out. So we had two Bond films in this one year. They both did very well, pulling in 160 million for Never Say Never Again, and I think something like 185 million for Octopussy. So The non-Sean Connery Bond movie actually did better at the box office, but that one has the lineage and the intro and everything that people are following, whereas this movie has kind of a very different feel for the intro. So it's kind of interesting. This whole case behind the scenes is really interesting. But let's find out how this movie compares to the first one, and more importantly, let us see if this is a Bond classic or a Bond crap. Let's find out. Okay, so it has been a few days, I'm going to confess, since I watched this one because the school year is in full effect and I have to kind of watch and record these wherever I can squeeze them in. And as I mentioned here, it has been a few days, so I'm going to rely a little bit on the plot guide here more than I normally do to kind of guide me through this one and explain why I chose some of the ratings. I did rate all the stuff when I watched the movie, so that part is fresh in my mind at least. But as far as, remembering all of the ins and outs of the plot itself and other things that happen, I'm going to rely a little bit more on the plot summary on this one than I normally might. Doubly so because this is similar to Thunderball, but it's also very different than Thunderball. So let's take a look at this. Let's get into the plot first on this one, which we usually don't do. But all right, so here's the summary of the plot. I will do my best to go fast on this one. Let's get into this. Here we go. So we have Bond starting off at a health clinic when he fails a routine training exercise, and here he finds a nurse named Fatima Blush, who is beating a patient in a nearby room. This person is bandaged, and then we see that there is a machine that scans his eye. Bond is spotted by Fatima Blush, and she sends an assassin to kill him in the clinic gym. Instead, Bond manages to kill the assassin, destroying quite a bit of the health clinic in the process, I will add. And we have M being forced to pay for all of the damages because Bond apparently wasn't clean enough in his beatdown of this assassin. And so Bond is removed from active duty. All right, we find out that Fatima Blush works for Spectre. We've seen them in a lot of the movies so far. And Ernst Blofeld is back in this one, which, again, I was kind of shocked by. Particularly so because, you guessed it, we have another actor here playing Blofeld. So this is now, I believe, the fourth actor that has played this character in the Bond movies. I guess 5 if you count Dr. Evil. But who wants to count Dr. Evil? Basically no one. So this one is, let's see here. Fatima is working with a U.S. Air Force pilot named Jack Patashi, and essentially this is a procedure that they've done to make his right eye match the retinal pattern of the U.S. president. So that's pretty creative, I guess. Essentially, he uses this to go around recognition security at a military base in England, and while he's there, he essentially steals 2 of the live nuclear warheads, replacing them with dummies. And what they're going to do with these 2 warheads is not necessarily start the war at first, but they're going to extort billions of dollars from NATO and all of the countries involved in NATO. All right, once this guy's job is done, Fatima Blush kills him. So Patashi is gone, and it kind of looks like this was a crime that doesn't have someone who committed it because that guy's dead. Okay, meanwhile, we have the foreign secretary in Britain who is going to tell M to reactivate the 00 section, and Bond is back on the case to go track down these weapons. He goes to the Bahamas, where he finds Domino Patashi, the pilot's sister, and her wealthy lover, Maximilian Largo, who is also Spectre's top agent. And we've seen the character of Largo as well, also in Thunderball. That movie, if I can jog your memory, had a 5 out of 10 for villains. They were pretty terrible. So let's see how this movie stacks up compared to that. Okay, we have Largo's yacht heading for France, and Bond goes to there, and where he meets a French contact named Nicole. Maybe that is Nicole. I don't know. There's no teeth, so I guess it's Nicole. And also CIA counterpart and friend Felix Leiter here, who is back in the Bond movies again in this one. I believe a different actor though on this. We have Bond going to a beauty center where he poses as an employee to give Domino a massage. We should point out that Domino is played by, since we're doing this out of order for normalcy here, a very young Kim Basinger plays Domino in this film. So there's that. All right. So he gets enough of a massage at this place, or gives, I should say, enough of a massage that he finds out where Largo will be holding a casino event that evening, a charity event for kids. And then we have Largo and Bond playing this weird futuristic 3D video game called Domination that Largo developed. And this was actually one of the scenes that stole the movie for me because I feel like I have seen that moment or pictures from that moment before. But essentially, if I can describe this to you, Bond's on one side, Largo's on the other side of this large table, like a ping pong, not a ping pong, air hockey table. And where like a net would be on a ping pong table, there's like this video screen with maps of the world and countries, and Bond and Largo are holding two joysticks each, both shooting stuff towards this screen. And each player has two nuclear missiles that they can shoot. Ironic, yes, towards the other player, and the other player can block if they use the block at the right time. Once a player is out of nuclear missiles, they just have their gun that they're shooting the countries at the same time with. So it's a very frenetic game as you're watching this on screen. And it looks pretty cool, to be honest. For 1983, this is actually a pretty cool looking scene. Now, the trick to the game is when you lose, you get zapped from the joysticks that you're holding with your hands. If you let go of the joysticks, you lose the game and you get zapped. And if you release because you're in too much pain, then you also lose the game. And so Bond, I think Bond loses twice in two different countries, and then he challenges Largo to the entire world as their match, and he does much better that time and wins. So after being hurt twice, then Largo is the one who loses the game. Instead of money, though, all he asks for is a dance with Domino out on the dance floor. And when the two of them are alone, he tells her that her brother has been killed, and it's by Largo's orders to turn her against him at that point, essentially. Bond comes back and finds that his contact, Nicole, has been killed by Fatima Blush. We get a vehicle chase with a motorbike. Bond is eventually captured, I believe, in the back of a van or a semi, rather. He's kind of pushed into, and then the semi closes up, I believe is how that happened. She admits that she is forced to declare that Bond is a worthy adversary, and she wants him to write in writing that she is the number one person he has ever had sex with. So that's a weird sentence to say out loud, and a weird infatuation for someone to have, I guess. But as they're starting to get a little sensual here, but not too sensual because she's there to kill him. She just wants it in writing before he dies. He gets out his pen to write it, and he uses, of course, one of Q's devices here, the pen gun, which kills Blush with an explosive dart, which I believe like left her shoes or something kind of gross. Like everything else was gone except her shoes. Okay, then Bond tries to get onto Largo's yacht, the Flying Saucer, to look for the missing warheads, because remember, we haven't actually found where those are at yet. He finds Domino on the yacht and makes sure that he kisses Domino in front of a one-way mirror to make Largo jealous. Largo runs to find where the two of them are, and essentially Bond, I think, uses his computer to like find out something about the missiles, where they're at. So there we go. They get to North Africa, and Largo sells Domino to some locals to do whatever they want with him, or her, rather. And then Bond basically escapes from prison at the last second, rides in, I think on a horse, and saves her from being killed or slaughtered or stripped or something far worse than all of that, I guess. So he rescues her, and we get on a submarine now where we find the first warhead that is in Washington, D.C. I don't believe we see that scene. It's just mentioned that they find the warhead there. And then they find Largo has gone to a secret location known as the Tears of Allah, which is off Ethiopia in like some kind of hidden cave type place. So Bond ends up coming into this underground facility. There's a big gun battle that takes place. Largo gets away with the second warhead, but Bond chases after him. We get a fight under the water, I believe. Largo gets pinned because Domino shoots Largo at the last second with a spear gun, and Domino presumably has taken revenge for her brother's death, and Largo is left to basically die underwater, and Bond defuses the bomb at like a second left, of course. So Bond retires and returns to the Bahamas to work with Domino, and he says he'll never again be a secret agent, which, has a lot of commentary there as far as this is Sean Connery's last time out in this role. He retires in storyline here with Domino Tish, I guess it was Domino Derval in the other Thunderball movie, so slightly different name in this one. And that's it. That's the storyline here for Connery and Bond in this one. So some scores here for us. Let's get to all this stuff, shall we? Let's start off with our plot. Well, it's a derivative plot because it's not that different than Thunderball, although it has its own takes on it. There's certainly a couple scenes and locales that are not in the other one, but the basic premise of having, a couple nuclear missiles or warheads that we need to find, etc., was okay. Nothing outstanding there. The use of Blofeld here just kind of felt like a stick it in your face type moment. He's not really needed for anything. I not anything special in, I guess they had to because they had to work with the material for Thunderball, but we're in the mid 80s at this point. I've gone through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm real burned out on the nuclear warhead type angle at this point. And so plot wise, 16 out of 30 on this. It's not great, if I'm being quite honest. One of the interesting things about this film is that somehow this was made in the 80s, but looks like it was made in the 70s, even though they are remaking a movie in the 80s that was a remake of a movie from the 60s. Somehow this one just looks grainier and darker, and it might just been the difference between the Eon production versus whatever technical company was behind this one. So 16 out of 30 on the plot. Action here's it's decent. We do have a couple cool scenes, like I said, even though it's like a non-traditional action moment. I really enjoyed the video game scene between the two of them, Largo and Bond. I did think there was some fun hand-to-hand in this one. And, a couple fun moments. Nothing outrageous. I'll give this one an 11 out of 15. So both of those categories actually score one better than Thunderball did, but they got some ground to make up because Thunderball was tied for our worst movie so far. So keep that in mind. Okay, as far as the rest of the categories here, wrapping this up, the title of this movie, Never Say Never Again. I get that they made it that because it was Sean Connery's last words and kind of twisted them around, but in the context of the movie where he literally retires, it just seems kind of silly. And also, I think I like when the movie title has more to do with the plot of the movie, which I guess you could argue this has to do with the ending of the movie. But if you are to take the ending at its truth, then that doesn't make sense either. So 2 out of 5 on the title on this one. As far as the theme on this movie, well, the intro is interesting because they don't have the traditional gunfire intro where you kind of look down the scope, the sights, and you see Bond down there and he shoots and the blood comes, and then you get into the prismatic geodesic prison. I don't even know what you call the. Still don't know what you actually call the style of art that they use in these movies, but that's very different. In this one, they have like the screen with 007 written all over it, the actual numbers, almost like binary code. And that's in the intro instead. So that's kind of interesting also. The song itself is interesting. We have a song in here called Never Say Never Again. And it does have kind of this sultry tone to it, I wrote down. Um, it's not great though. Like it sounds like it's in a sleazy 70s movie, which is not really what you want for a good Bond theme. You want it to have some class to it, I think. Um, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Just some fun stuff here. Like Bonnie Tyler, who was supposed to sing this one, said she didn't like the song and quit. And then we have Lonnie Hall, who is the person who sang the actual song here for Never Say Never Again. So in a different spot, this song might fit better, but as a Bond theme, it's actually the worst one we've had by far. So 4 out of 10. It's not only the worst song so far, it's the worst song by at least 2 points. 6 is the lowest score we've had for a few songs so far. Okay, on to our three performances. We're gonna need some strong scores here to combat all these other weak scores to get it a chance. Let's see if we can do it. We'll start with our Bond portrayal. It's Sean Connery, who, though probably one of the most iconic, if not the most iconic Bond, because he was the original. I don't know if he's the best acting Bond so far. That's some math we're going to have to do at the end of all this and some wrap up. I will say it's much closer than I thought between these. I'll have to do the math. But this is not Sean Connery's worst role, which ironically is in Thunderball, but it's also not his best performance, as he's had with some other movies as well. Somewhere in between, he seemed to be fairly okay slipping back into the role, although it did seem odd. And, he was older at the time. I think they said he was maybe 50 when he filmed this, which they said was funny because Roger Moore was actually 53 and he was, this is the one where Connery was kind of shown as being the old spy who's close to retirement. And then Roger Moore was technically older at the same time. So also interesting. And I just saw a footnote here for trivia that apparently Sean Connery broke his wrist while he was filming because his martial arts instructor broke his wrist, and his martial arts instructor was Steven Seagal. Proving once again, you don't mess with Steven Seagal. Says he didn't know his wrist was broken until over a decade later when he finally got it checked out or something. So there's that. 12 out of 15 for our Bond portrayal on this one. On to the women's. We have Domino Petiche on this one instead of Domino Derval. Kim Basinger is our main lady in this movie, and she acts about as good as Kim Basinger can, which is not very good. She has always had a certain quality to her face, which is interesting because I think maybe she is simultaneously attractive and not as exciting as people make her out to be. And I should play like a femme fatale sex pop for most of her life, but I don't know. She's okay. She's not entirely my cup of tea here. So that combined with a weak performance in what is generally a weak movie with little character development on this one. 7 out of 15, tied for worst with Octopussy. And then we have our villains. Now, Thunderball had Largo in number 2 and an overall score of 5. Here we have Blofeld and Largo and Fatima Blush and none of them were that great. Fatima's probably the most interesting. I did think Largo had a very good sinister style face to him. I'd have to look up what that actor was from because he did look familiar from something else. But taken as a whole, I didn't necessarily think that the actors weren't given a ton to do in this one, but B, none of them were particularly standout either to me. So the actors, ironically for the villains, are going to get a 5 out of 10, the same score as Thunderball. So I add these up, I get 11, 16, 5, 7, 12, 4, 2 equals Never Say Never, having a total score of 57 out of 100. Absolute crap. And in case you were wondering, Thunderball had a score of 56 based on some different scores here and there. So, yeah, there's that. Okay, now, favorite movie quote in this one. Bond is seducing a lady at the health clinic-y type place, I believe, or maybe it was a hotel later in the movie, I forget. Either way, he's with a lady in her room on her bed, and there's an explosion somewhere across the pool on the other side and the other floors, and the lady says, "What's that?" And Bond replies, "Proof we made the right decision." And she says, "About what, darling?" And he says, "Your place or mine." There you go. Okay, so officially we have gotten through the 2 non-Eon productions. Casino Royale, we've gotten through the Sean Connery movies. George Lazenby has been laid to rest. And I have to apologize. One of our loyal listeners, Matt, shout out to Matt, told me that I had this incorrect, and he is right. A View to a Kill is actually one more with Roger Moore. I didn't realize that, which means Timothy Dalton apparently is only in 2 movies, The Living Daylights and License to Kill. So next up for us, we have A View to a Kill featuring some Duran Duran. You know that's going to get a high score from me. And some Roger Moore, followed by The Living Daylights with Aha, also guaranteed to get a good score from me. And Timothy Dalton, and then License to Kill with Timothy Dalton. Then we will go into Pierce Brosnan and GoldenEye, and somewhere in there, depending on how these weeks fall, I still want to do the GoldenEye 007 N64 replay through to celebrate all this. And I know it's available in different forms, different places, but I will be loading up the cartridge and getting out that bizarre Nintendo 64 utter-shaped controller and milking my way through some of the missions in that game, probably horrified by graphics that in my head at this point are still fantastic. So that's coming up yet. All right, this is going to drop on Wednesday, ladies and gents, and this is a huge day for us coming up, which is Friday, when the Fonda hosts are going to do what we at least try to do yearly, but it doesn't always happen, our pilgrimage. This time it's going to be to yours truly's house, and we will be engaging in Man Weekend, Man Olympics 2023, where I'm sure all sorts of debauchery will happen, along with all sorts of challenges, and we probably will hopefully be recording a episode or 2 from that weekend, so look out for insanity coming up at that point as well. Okay, I think that's gonna do it for me here today, ladies and gents. I got lots to do, so I gotta keep moving on here. So take care of yourselves out there. I think the worst of the heat is over, although it looks like we may get some more heat next week yet. But until then, this has been Cody with another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagree. Thank you, and bye.